Is the world out there just driving you crazy? Well, listen to something just a little bit less crazy. This is Mike Dell's World.
Go podcasting!
And good morning, good evening, good afternoon, whatever the case may be. This is Mike, and this is Mike Dell's World on Napod Pomo. Made it 15 episodes in. Well, 14. 15. It's the 15th day. We're halfway done. And still got 15 more to go to make the goal of 30 episodes in 30 days. Go check out the other podcasts doing this over at napodpomo.org. And today being Monday, it's also opening day of deer season in Michigan, so it's practically a state holiday. So I know Todd Cochran from Raw Voice Blueberry, he went out hunting this morning, and he posted a pretty cool video about a little 4-point that walked up on him that he did not shoot. Figured now let him grow another year. But he was one tired puppy, though, because he got up nice and early and went hunting and then came in and worked half a day. And and as I'm podcasting, he's podcasting over at Geek News Central. So he'll be ready to hit the rack, I'm sure, at a reasonable time tonight. But anyway, this is the second episode I recorded today because I screwed up yesterday and didn't do the ham radio episode. So if you're hearing this and you hadn't heard the one about ham radio nets, go back and check that out. So today I'm going to talk about Podcast Index, more specifically Podcasting 2.0. I know I have to say it like that because Adam, talks that way. But that's a project by Dave Jones and Adam Curry. And they're making some big headway. They're, some of the main things here. Well, here's from their website. It says, Podcast Index is here to preserve, protect, and extend the open, independent podcasting ecosystem. We do this by enabling developers to have access to open, categorized index that will always be available for free for any use from podcastindex.org. And it goes on the website, we do this by enabling developers. Oh, wait a minute, we already said that. But, it says try a new podcasting app today and see how much better the experience can be. And there's a big list of them. I will have them in the show notes, of course. And I know Adam hates the word show notes. I guess I do too. It's going to be in the post for this episode over at MikeDell.com. But I'll have lots of links to different things. 3 distinct things they're working on is one, of course, the index, which up until about a year ago, most podcast apps, didn't matter whether they were on Android or the web or desktop or Apple or whatever, other than, Apple Podcasts is the official Apple one, and Google Podcasts is the official Android one. But there's a lot of other ones. There's, Podcast Addict, there's Overcast, Downcast, Pocket Cast. There's a whole bunch of different apps that specialize in different things. And I don't even count the music apps that added podcasting. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about dedicated podcast apps, or what we used to call way back in the day podcatchers. But they had one not fatal flaw, but one potentially fatal flaw when it comes to preserving the open nature of podcasting, is that they got all of their directory listings from Apple. Apple has an open API that any developer can use if they're making a podcast app. And then if the podcast is in Apple Podcasts, then it can be, it could also be listed in these particular apps. Now, some apps kind of did their own thing, but most of them used the podcast API from Apple. And, Adam and Dave there decided that, and rightfully so, that, with the cancel culture the way it is and just all kinds of things. And plus there's just one point of failure. That's the other thing. It's, if Apple decides one day they wanted to pull that, then all these apps just go stupid. Or at least they don't go stupid, but they go, it's a lot harder to find podcasts on them because their little search directory thing depended on Apple. And so they decided they're going to recreate that or create it from scratch, a thing called Podcast Index. And that has a API, and it's an open API. And not completely open. You got to kind of sign up for it, but it's free. But any developer that's developing an application for podcasting can use it and can use it for any purpose. That's the other thing. They're not going to say, oh, well, you can't use it for that. And, free speech and all, so there's just, a lot of, I'm saying, a lot, almost as bad as anyway. But there's, lots of apps out there now that have switched. And Apple also had a famous glitch that, somewhere around June, July, they completely revamped their system. And they also, at the same time, I guess the term would be dumbed down their API. And they also made it possible for podcasters to opt out of the API. So if I put my show on Apple Podcasts, I could check a little box that said, and don't include me in the API, which meant that no other third-party apps could pull that directory and get my show in their directory. Well, why would you do that? I've always said, you want to listen to a podcast or you want to listen to my podcast, I don't care how you do it. Listen anywhere, with the exception of Spotify in my case, but that's a whole nother thing we talked about last week. But suffice it to say that, one of those control points that Adam and Dave and this whole movement for Podcast Index or Podcasting 2.0, can alleviate. It's no longer a control thing. And like I said, a lot of apps have taken this. There's I'm just looking here under newpodcastapps.com, which I will also have a link to. There's one I never heard of, Jump Link. Never heard of it. It's some sort of search app that searches podcasts. Podcast Addict uses it. Podfriend, that's a really interesting bunch of apps because he's doing web apps and progressive web apps and doing standalone apps for Mac, PC, and I think he's doing one for iOS and Android. I don't know. Podverse, another one. Fountain, another one. Podstation, Podcast Guru, Sphinx Chat, which is not specifically for podcasting, but it works. Hypercatcher's an app. Breeze, another one that's not specific for podcasting, but works with Podcasting 2.0. AntennaPod, Ivy.fm, never heard of that one. Anytime Podcast Player, Cast Coverage, CurioCaster, Pod LP, Cast-O-Matic. There's just a whole bunch. Lots. I mean, it just goes on and on and on. And then there's other things that use it. PowerPress by Blueberry supports some of the namespace tags. But there's a lot of just plain podcast apps that do different things differently than say Apple Podcasts or Google Podcasts or whatever you're used to. So go check those out. Maybe you'll find one you like. And another thing that they're doing is the podcast namespace, and it's literally podcast in the RSS specification. I know this will glaze your eyes over a little bit. It's kind of technical, geeky, but RSS is how podcasting gets delivered and syndicated out to everybody. And for the longest time, there's been certain tags, but a lot of people wanted to add some tags, add some functionality to RSS, and nobody's taken the bull by the horns and got wide adoption on anything. This, I think, has the best chance, and they have a whole bunch of things that you can you can add to your RSS feed: transcripts, chapters, search, funding, location, person tag's kind of cool. It's where you can add who was on the podcast with you and all that kind of stuff. Seasons. Now I know Apple has seasons, but nobody else takes seasons from Apple. or from Apple's tags. So, alternate enclosure, that's if you wanted to have, say, a low bit rate version or a version in another language, or, could be used for lots of things. Sound bites, if you've got, a couple of sound bites you want to call out, or there's also value tags, which I have that in this feed, which I'll talk about a little bit later. But there's just a lot of functionality that has been kind of dormant since podcasting started back. Whatever, Apple added a bunch of tags, and that got pretty wide adoption. But then so now here's some more. And also Raw Voice, my company I work for, added some tags that are specific to our system, but anybody could pick up if they wanted to. But we're supporting it in PowerPress right now at Blueberry. But and then the third thing was to take the advertising out of podcasting. Not take it out, but provide an alternative funding for podcasts. Adam calls it value for value. The time, treasure, or talent, to support the podcasts that you love. And the way they're doing it with the funding, is it funding? No, it's the, what was the other tag? Value tag, and other ways of doing it. You can actually stream Bitcoin or Satoshis, which are a very small fraction of Bitcoins. But you can stream those to, if you're using one of the new apps that covers it, uses the funding tag. You can sign up to, pay the podcaster a certain amount of Satoshis per minute, or you can boost them. And I don't have a boost sound effect, so Adam, Dave, if you're listening, sorry, no boost sound effect here, but. It was, but this one is, enabled. So if you so chose to want to donate to me using Bitcoin and Satoshis, you could do so. Podfriend is a good one that does funding. Podverse. Let's see. What is it? I don't know. Podstation, Sphinx, Hypercatcher. There's a bunch of them that do it. So just, play around with one of those new apps. And, it's a little complicated right now to set up to receive and send value for value Satoshis, but it's pretty cool. And I forget how many podcasts. They have, I think, a running total here of how many podcasts. I don't know. It doesn't. They just have a listing of value for value enabled podcasts over at podcastindex.org. But it's kind of cool. And they're doing other things like Podping. What that is, right now I put out this episode, or let's say I put out an episode earlier today, and, it took Overcast, 20 minutes or so before it realized that I had a new episode and downloaded it for me. Okay. Sometimes Apple Podcasts could take up to 5 hours. They say it's every 8 minutes or something, or that's what they're shooting for. But right now it's about 5 hours sometimes, before your show's available on Apple Podcasts. Well, if Apple Podcasts and other apps, and some apps are using it, and some shows are using it, that's the other thing, because you got to get your podcast host to use it. We're working on it at Blueberry. At some point, we'll get Podping up and running for both PowerPress and for Blueberry hosted feeds. And what happens there is if the app is subscribing to Podping, they say, oh, hey, here's one that I'm subscribed to. And, it gets listed right away. Sorry, I'm hiccuping here. But it's a pretty slick thing. It makes getting the episodes to your listeners quicker. And it's, one of the other little side projects they're working on. And they got a whole bunch of stuff. They have a Mastodon chat server or social media. I don't know what you call it. It's kind of Twitter-like, but it's podcastindex.social. So you can go over there and sign up, and it's usually a bunch of geeks talking about geeky stuff about podcasting, the technology stuff, and value for value and all that. But, and then they've, of course, got a GitHub and, the whole, geeky open source project thing. But it is really cool. Definitely is going to move the needle in podcasting, at least as far as innovation goes. Podcasting, most of the news you hear about podcasting now is all about ad deals and exclusives and all this stuff. And, my thought on it, and plus, Adam and Dave and, a lot of the guys associated with, and gals associated with Podcast Index, think advertising is just about censorship. I mean, if you have an advertiser on your podcast and you want to talk crap about something that they're doing, you're not going to have that advertiser very long. So you're less likely to speak whatever you wanted to say about said advertiser. If you get into politics, doesn't matter what politics, if you go too far either way, advertisers don't like that. So that stifles free speech. So, if you can find another way to fund your podcast, even if it's, just buy a cup of coffee once a week so you can drink coffee while you're doing your show, a little something is something, that's a good thing. But it's definitely a passion project. I do believe they are, registered as a nonprofit. I don't know I don't think they're tax deductible type nonprofit, but they are a nonprofit company, and they're doing some cool things, definitely. So go check it out. There's also a podcast associated with Podcast Index, and that's Podcasting 2.0. That's the name of the show. And my watch keeps beeping here. But Podcasting 2.0 is the show name. It's not listed in Apple, or at least it wasn't listed in Apple. It might now be, but you can find it over at podcastindex.org and any of those apps. Look up Podcasting 2.0. And it's Dave and Adam call it the board meeting of the podcast.org or podcastindex.org and Podcasting 2.0. They got a branding problem there. Anyway, I've been on that show, Todd and I from Blueberry Raw Voice. We did a session with those guys, and we'll probably be back when we have something to announce. So that'll be fun. Not on the schedule anytime real soon, but we're getting there. So that's going to be my little episode about podcasting and Podcast Index. Definitely go over and check it out. I'll have plenty of links over at mikedell.com. Look for the big red logo that looks like a lowercase I with a couple of RSS feeds for ears. You can't miss it. Look for that one, and there'll be all kinds of links and information, links to information about the Podcast Index. Catch me tomorrow.